Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why we tend to either really like or really dislike people based on their political views? This new study dives deep into that exact question, exploring the psychology behind why our political opinions can shape who we connect with. The researchers wanted to understand why people get so emotionally charged about politics these days. They noticed that in many countries, people aren't just disagreeing on issues, they're actively disliking members of the other political side. They call this affective polarization. The big puzzle was how these feelings, dislike or dislike, actually form based on someone's political views and how common those views are. So they came up with a cool idea called the Evil P model, which stands for the expectancy-value model of interpersonal likability in politics. The core idea is pretty simple when you break it down. Imagine you meet someone. Two things really matter for how much you like them politically. First, how similar are their political views to yours? This is the value part. If they share your views, you'll probably value that connection. Second, how common is their political view in the whole population? This is the expectancy part. The idea is that if someone holds a political view that is super rare, that view gets special attention. Think about it this way. If most people are moderate and you meet someone else who is also moderate, you might think, cool, we get along. But because that view is so common, it doesn't create a super strong feeling either way. Now, imagine a truly extreme view that you almost never hear. If you meet someone with that rare view, and it happens to be one you really like, you'll probably feel a very strong connection, a strong liking. On the other hand, if you meet someone with a rare view that you really dislike, your dislike will also be amplified. So it is the combination of do I like this view and how common is it that predicts how much you like or dislike someone. To test this, the researchers used some really large existing data sets. They looked at data from the American National Election Studies, which tracks what Americans think about politics over many years. They also looked at data from the British Election Study, which does something similar for the UK. These studies are great because they survey thousands of people, giving a really good snapshot of public opinion. They essentially went back through this data and looked at how people rated political candidates and parties. They figured out each candidate's or party's political view, and then they figured out how likely it was for that view to show up in the general population. They did this using surveys that asked people about their own political views and then asked them to rate how much they liked or disliked various candidates or parties, often using a feeling thermometer, which is like a scale from cold to hot feelings. And what did they find? Well, their model Evil P held up pretty well. The first big finding, which they call Hypothesis 1, was that the expectancy how rare a view isandi, value how much you like that view really do interact to predict how much you like someone. In simpler terms, their predictions about how likely someone was to like a candidate or party based on the model matched pretty closely with how people actually rated them in real life. The interaction term, which is the key part of their theory, was statistically significant, meaning it is not just a random chance finding. This means that both how common a view is and how much you like that view are important for how you feel about a politician or party. Next, they looked at a couple of implications of this Evil P model. One of the big questions was about moderation. They predicted that, on average, people tend to like those with more moderate political views the most. This sounds like common sense, right? Most people are somewhere in the middle. And in the data, they found that this was generally true. Moderate candidates and parties received the highest average likability ratings. But here is where it gets really interesting. They also predicted that extreme candidates and parties would have more extreme fans and haters. What they mean by this is that while moderate candidates get a steady level of positive feelings from lots of people, extreme candidates might not get as much love overall. But the people who do like them really like them, and the people who don't like them really don't like them. So extreme candidates tend to have a wider range of feelings directed at them, from intense admiration to intense dislike. The data showed that as candidates became more extreme, the gap between their highest and lowest ratings widened. To make sure their findings weren't just about politicians and parties, they also looked at attitudes towards different societal groups. They reanalyzed data from 9 different studies where people rated various social groups, like baseball fans or skaters, based on their political views and how likable they found them. And again, the results largely supported their Evil P model. The interaction between the rarity of a group's beliefs and how much people valued those beliefs predicted their attitudes. They also found that groups with more moderate views were generally liked more on average, while groups with more extreme views had stronger fans and haters. So, what does all this mean? The researchers are suggesting that our political views influence how we form opinions about other people, and that this process is particularly strong when certain political ideas are rare. This helps explain why political polarization can be so intense. It is not just about disagreeing, it is about how these disagreements combined with the perceived popularity of those disagreements, shape our social connections and feelings towards others. They also touched on some really practical implications. For example, they suggested that in elections, this model might explain why moderately extreme candidates can sometimes be more successful than purely moderate ones. While moderate candidates are liked by many, that liking might not be very strong. But extremist candidates, even if disliked by a majority, can energize a passionate and dedicated base, a base that is more likely to vote. As a result, if voter turnout is low among the more moderate or less enthusiastic voters, these energized extreme bases can make a difference in who wins. Scroll limitations center now, like any study. This one has its limitations. One key thing is that they assumed people have a pretty accurate idea of how common different political views are. But we know from other research that people often misperceive others' opinions, especially if they're stuck in their own social media bubbles. People might overestimate how common their own views are, or underestimate how common moderate views are in the general population. While they ran some simulations and found that these biases might not completely change the main conclusions, it is definitely an area for future exploration. Also, the model simplifies political views into a single left-right spectrum, which doesn't capture the full complexity of political beliefs for everyone, especially in multi-party systems. Scroll Conclusion Center overall. This study gives us a clearer picture of the psychological underpinnings of effective polarization using a formal model called Evil P. It shows that our liking or disliking of others, especially in politics, is a complex interplay between how much we value certain beliefs and how rare we perceive those beliefs to be. It explains why extremism can be both intensely loved and intensely hated, and why moderation might be generally liked but not passionately embraced. This research helps us understand the emotional landscape of contemporary politics and how our personal views shape our social world. It is a reminder that psychology plays a huge role in how we navigate our differences. So what is my take on this? I think it is a really clever way to formalize something we all feel but sometimes struggle to explain. The Evil P model is powerful because it is simple yet captures essential elements of how we form opinions about people based on their political stances. The fact that they tested it on large, real-world datasets like the NS and BEST makes their findings quite compelling. The idea that rarity amplifies feelings is particularly insightful, especially in a world where niche communities and extreme viewpoints can gain disproportionate attention online. As for weaknesses, the assumption of accurate perception of expectancy is a big one. We know from other psychology research that our perceptions are often biased. People tend to overestimate the prevalence of their own opinions and underestimate others, which could lead to different or more extreme attitudes than this model predicts in its simplest form. Testing how these biases specifically modify the Evil P predictions would be a fantastic next step. For instance, if someone believes a certain extreme view is much more common than it is, their reaction to someone holding that view might be different than if they knew its true rarity. And what about the real world? This research has major implications for understanding political divides. It suggests that efforts to bridge political divides might need to consider not just policy agreement, but also the perceived commonality of those policies and viewpoints. It also sheds light on the potential dangers of echo chambers and misinformation that can warp our perception of how widespread certain ideas truly are. Future research could definitely build on this by incorporating those perceptual biases I mentioned. They could also explore how Evil P applies across different cultures and political systems, or investigate how it interacts with other factors like personality traits or social identity. Imagine a modified Evil P model that accounts for multiple dimensions of political beliefs, not just a single left-right scale. That would be a fascinating extension. What do you think about this Evil P model and its implications for understanding political likability? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a like, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more deep dives into fascinating psychology research, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.